The parts being installed today are brought to you in part by Techno Toy Tuning. What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be doing some modifications on the front suspension and brakes of the Datsun 510. First, and potentially most importantly, we're going to be going from these tiny little disc brakes that support around 80 to 90 horsepower to a much larger Wilwood brake system that's going to give us the stopping power that we need for the engine modifications that we're going to do. Okay, so to assemble our Wilwood brake kit, first we have the rotor itself, which personally I got cross drilled or slotted. If you get them drilled, you know, you have these kind of small holes in them, and which can actually cause a large accumulation of heat and end up cracking your rotor easier than if you didn't get them cross drilled or slotted. So I went with the slotted, which allows a little bit more of heat dispersion and overall should make for a longer lasting brake rotor. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some 13mm bolts and attach the rotor to the rotor hat. Now I'm going to use a thread lock on all of these, and it's just a simple process of wash, rinse, repeat. I'll get them all hand tight and then I will tighten them down with the ratchet. Something you should be aware of before you kind of get started with this brake kit is that you will need 15 inches or larger diameter rims just to accommodate the massive brake upgrade because of the large rotor size. Okay, so when you're tightening these, you're going to want to go in a star pattern just so you can evenly distribute the torque and not have anything be unlevel. So I just like to tighten them, not nothing over tighten. Just get them to the point where they feel nice and snug. And then I go across. And once that one feels nice and snug, I go across. And then I go across. And go back and double check all of them. Make sure that nothing has become loose, and this will be your final tightening. Make sure they're all seated in there. Even go around a third time if you just want to be extra cautious. Everything has equal torque on it. And there's your rotor cap and your rotor hub. And now let's get on to mounting it to the hub assembly. Okay, so before we can attach the rotor and the rotor hat to the hub, obviously we're going to have studs in there because the old ones were all rotted out and they aren't going to have enough room for our spacers. We're going to pull through these slightly elongated studs. You can start by adding some thread lock to the back. And once again, if you watch the rear brake disc conversion, then you know that it's just a bunch of washers and a nut, and then you're just going to tighten it. Okay, we're going to actually need to use a wrench because this is a shallow ratchet and we don't have enough clearance. Alright, so it's just simply a game of tightening until you feel comfortable that the studs are through enough. As with any car, a lot of rust will build up if it's a certain number of years old, and I definitely experienced that with this one. Getting this hub removed from the car did take me a number of hours, but if you just have a couple of hammers and some patience, you should be able to break the rust free. You see that? We got the stud pulled in. Just a few minutes of turning. Okay, so now that we got that on and we got our studs pulled through, we are going to attach our hub to our rotor assembly. Now, Techno Toy Tuning provides bolts for you, but either they didn't put them in, which I'm doubting because they seem like a pretty well put together company, or I lost them, which I'm guessing is the likelier of the two. So luckily I kept the old hub assembly nuts just it's always a good idea just to keep bags around until you know that you don't need parts, and label everything. Labeling can be huge, but yeah, it's pretty much just same routine. Thread lock. You got your washer on. Throw it in there and tighten all these down. Okay, well, before we put the hub back on the spindle, we're going to repack the wheel bearing. Now, why are we doing this? Well, because brief history of the car, I found it hadn't been registered in the California DMV since before 2005, and it was in the middle of Hesperia, which, if you're familiar, you know is the middle of the high desert in California, and there were no dust covers on the wheels. So this wheel bearing was exposed to large amounts of dust over the years, grit, grime, and all that is just going to stay inside the bearing, and it's going to cause that to break over time. We want to take care of our stuff, so we're going to re-grease this, and I'm going to show you guys how. First, we want to get all the old grease out and fill it with new grease. So we're going to take a big dollop of grease, put it on our hand, and then begin to repack this bearing. And what you're going to do, you're just going to take it and you're going to scrape it slowly on your hand. And what this is doing is it's just filling in the cracks with grease, and in a little bit you'll be able to see some of the new grease pushing out the old grease on top. It's a bit of a messy process, but well worth it if you want your car to drive well. Now you'll be able to see soon some of the new grease popping through. Let's see if I can show you guys that. Okay, so right there, I don't know if this is focusing. Okay, yeah, you can see right along this edge, you can see the old grease popping out. You see those bubbles? All that is old, dirty grease. And we just want to keep going until you see mostly pink grease coming out. And you want to go all the way around. You only want to do it from one side also. You don't want to switch sides and start going from this side, because that way you know that you got all of that middle grease out. And you can intermittently wipe the old grease off on a towel nearby. But it is important to get all the old grease out, because if you use two different kinds of grease, what that can do is, grease is just comprised of, soap and a few other ingredients. But if you're using two different kinds of grease, you have two different kinds of soap, and those two aren't going to adhere to each other, and they're going to create a thin film where you aren't going to have the ideal friction between the ball bearings, and it can end up destroying your ball bearings if you don't change out the majority of the old grease for new grease. Will there be a little bit left in there of the old grease? Definitely, but the most you can eliminate, the better your wheel bearings are going to be in the long run. Now at this point you can see the color change in the grease. Now this means that you've pushed out all the old dirty grease and you're putting in new grease. So once you get this all the way around, it's a good time to stop, and you'll have a freshly greased wheel bearing. Okay, so now that we got this whole hub, rotor assembly complete, we're going to put on our Techno Toys Tuning bracket, which is going to allow us to put the Wilwood caliper on. Use a little bit of thread lock on these. There's one. And there's two. So now we're going to slide our hub and rotor assembly onto the spindle. Oh. make sure that's on there. And we are going to take our freshly greased up wheel bearing and put the conical end in first. Now, it might seem at first like this doesn't want to go all the way back, but this requires a little bit of persuasion to get it into the place that you want it. And now we're going to put on our washer and our bolt. And we got this washer which has a slight tab right down there, which is going to match up with the spindle on the bottom. Slide that back, put this guy on. Now, what I've been told about assembling hubs like this is you want to spin the lock nut to pretty much hand tight, or until this only does between 1.5 and 2 rotations when you spin it. So that seems good right there. And because it's not a very tight bolt, what we're going to do, or nut I should say, just throw a cotter pin in there. It's got a hole for it. And let's go with one of these, maybe smaller. And this just prevents, it's got to be a little bigger then. This just prevents your nut from coming loose, which could be bad news for you. Okay, and now we're going to put on our Wilwood brake caliper, which is going to mount to the rear bracket like so. But first we're going to put in our Wilwood brake pads, which are these puppies right here. And once again, you really want to make sure that you do not touch the inside of these with your hand. It's nice they provide you with a large cotter pin. Slide through. Make sure that these guys stay where they should be. Bend it back with some pliers. Alright folks, there you have it. Front end tie rods, TC rods, coilover Wilwood brakes, rotors and calipers, idler arm braces, bearings for the idler arms, steering box brace. Hopefully this thing is going to haul, but it's also going to be safe. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this helps you guys out on some of your project cars. If you are a smart car person, you'll notice one glaring mistake in this assembly, and that is the lack of a dust cap, which I'm still missing, but that will be fixed eventually. Alright, thanks for watching guys, and hopefully this helps you guys out.